Hello, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we gently wander through the quiet corridors of the past, not to stir excitement, but to soothe your mind and slowly ease you toward rest. Tonight, we're going far back, farther than kings and castles, farther than writing or metal or maps. We're going back to a time when humans lived simply, closely tied to the land, and moved not with haste, but with the rhythm of the sun, the seasons, and the wind. Tonight's question is gentle but curious. What did cavemen actually do all day? The word caveman might conjure images of shouting, hunting, chaos, but that is a modern myth. The reality was much quieter. Days were slow, tasks were simple. There was no rush, there were no clocks. So, imagine yourself, not in a bustling city or even a quiet village, but in a small clearing, perhaps at the edge of a forest. A low fire smolders nearby. There are no roads, no machines, no metal. Just the quiet rustle of leaves, and the soft crackle of coals. This, is where your ancestors lived. And together, we'll explore what filled their days, not just their struggles, but their rhythms, their rituals, and the thoughtful ways they lived. We'll begin, with the morning. When the fire is low, the air is cool, and the first light begins to slip across the horizon. Let's settle into that moment now. Asterisk, the sun had no alarm. It rose slowly, quietly, and for the early humans, morning did not begin with a jolt, but with a gradual stirring. They often slept near each other, not just for warmth, but for comfort. Under rocky overhangs, within natural shelters, or tucked inside thick brush, their sleeping spots were chosen with care. The ground might be softened with animal hides, or perhaps with dried grasses woven into mats. The smell of smoke lingered in their hair, in their hides, in the very stones around them. Not unpleasant, more like the scent of safety. The fire had burned all night low and watchful, chased back by someone who stirred now and then to feed it a little wood. As the sun began its slow climb, soft golden light filtered through leaves and cracks. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor. A bird might sing. The cool of night gave way to something warmer. A child might wake, first blinking slowly, stretching, feeling the comforting heat of an adult nearby. Someone else would roll over, perhaps scratch their arm, sigh, and slowly, the group would stir. Not all at once, but in gentle waves. There were no chores yet, no obligations. Just waking, the coals of the fire would be checked, perhaps stirred, and fed a few sticks. Smoke would rise, thin and curling. As the first warmth began to spread again, hands would rub over faces, feeling the roughness of skin, the dampness of morning. Hair was often tangled, but that didn't matter. Hides were adjusted, bones cracked. Quietly as limbs were stretched out from sleep, there might be low murmurs, not quite words, but shared sounds of acknowledgement. Eye contact, a small smile. The group didn't need many words. Their bodies communicated much, and then came the quiet rituals. Some would step away to relieve themselves, perhaps near a tree line where dew still clung to grasses and spiders had left perfect little patterns of silk. The air here was rich with the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves. Others might move toward a nearby stream, if there was one. Cupped hands of cool water splashed gently on the face and chest. The sensation was shocking at first, but refreshing. It woke the senses. Birds called from above. Insects buzzed lazily in the new warmth. There was no formal breakfast, not in the way we think of it, but something was always shared. Leftover roasted roots, a piece of dried meat, a handful of foraged nuts tucked safely in a woven pouch. These small pieces were passed around more for nourishment than for indulgence. The morning hunger was quiet, not urgent. Often someone would tend the fire more fully, gnawing larger logs, using a stick to poke at embers, watching the flames rise. Fire was life. It meant warmth, protection, and the chance to cook if something fresh had been caught. Children played softly, nearby dragging a stick in the dirt, or stacking small stones. Their laughter was subdued, not because they were scolded, because the whole world, at that moment, was still wrapped in a hush. Morning was not for excitement, it was for observation, and so some would simply sit, watching, feeling, letting the light reach them. A man might lean back against a tree, his eyes scanning the treetops for movement. A woman might touch the soil, sifting it between her fingers, judging its dampness. Another might chew a stalk of grass thoughtfully, not because it tasted good, but because it gave the mouth something to do. There were no calendars, no need to get going. The rhythm of the day would unfold, as it always did, slowly, naturally. But mornings were important. They were the time to notice, to feel, to listen. And so, once the fire was steady, once the first bits of food had been shared, once bodies had stretched and the cool had lifted just slightly, it was time for the day to begin in earnest. Not with a rush, not with a bang, but with a breath. And that's where we'll go next. Let's follow them, as they begin to stretch, sense, and read the land before them. Asterisk, asterisk, the sun has only just begun to crest the horizon, casting gentle beams of amber light across the clearing. The embers of the morning fire still smolder, while a light mist curls low to the earth. It is not a time for rushing. Early humans, those often called cavemen, though they were far more varied and complex than that word suggests, did not begin their days with noise or bustle. Rather, there was a slow, instinctive unfolding, like the petals of a flower reacting to warmth. You can imagine them now, emerging from their sleeping places, be it the wide mouth of a sheltering cave, a simple lean-to of branches and hides, or beneath a canopy of trees when the weather allowed. They moved gradually, standing upright in stages, not because they were weak or sluggish, but because the body needs to greet the land carefully, especially when that land was uneven, damp with morning dew, or scattered with pebbles and twigs. Their feet, toughened by seasons of walking barefoot, met the ground not with heavy steps, but with a kind of measured reverence. You might picture a figure stretching upward, arms lifted slowly to the sky, mirroring the unfurling of leaves toward sunlight. These people knew the value of awareness. They didn't have clocks or alarms, but their inner rhythm was finely attuned to the natural world. Before anything else, before foraging, before hunting, before tool-making, sensing, they watched, they listened, they felt. One by one, they scanned the horizon, their eyes moving slowly over the shapes and shadows beyond the trees, not with fear, but with a patient attentiveness. A shape in the distance could be a grazing animal, or it could be a predator. They noted the movement of birds, how high they flew, how fast, the calls they made. These were signs, not just sounds. They knelt and pressed their fingers into the soil. Was it damp, cool, dry, and cracked? The condition of the earth told stories, whether rain had fallen nearby, whether roots were growing strong, or whether berries might soon ripen. The wind was not ignored either. It carried scents and temperature shifts. A warm gust from the east might suggest a change in weather. A breeze tinged with the musk of animals could mean a herd was nearby. You can almost feel that wind brushing across your skin. Not a chill, not a burn, but a presence. Something they welcomed and understood. Their bodies became instruments, finely tuned to their environment. Stretching wasn't a ritual for vanity or health as we think of it today. It was necessity, a quiet preparation. You might picture one, leaning forward, hands brushing their ankles, then rising again to swing their arms gently, or crouching low to flex their knees, to test their joints, to awaken muscles that had rested through the night. They breathed deeply, not out of mindfulness exercises, but because the cool morning air filled their lungs with promise. And the children, they would mirror this too, in their own way. Small limbs imitating adults, reaching, twisting, giggling softly at the way their bodies moved. Even the very young sensed this part of the day, a moment of observation, of contact between self and world. Nothing was wasted, not a glance, not a whisper of air. Even silence had meaning. They were not rushing to begin tasks, nor were they idling. They were reading, listening to what the world had to say before deciding what they might do in response. And in this still moment, this act of sensing the land, they laid the foundation for everything that would follow. The day's activities would require knowledge, and that knowledge didn't come from books or lectures. It came from feeling the earth between their toes, from noticing which branches drooped and which stood tall, from watching the sky stretch wide and pale above the trees. It's easy to think of these early humans as primitive or frantic, but the truth is, they moved with remarkable grace. They paused, not because they were idle, but because they were wise. Their survival wasn't just about reacting, it was about anticipating, not with anxiety, but with respect. The wind shifted. Again, a bird called from somewhere unseen, and with those quiet signs, they knew it was time to begin. Now that the body had awakened, and the world had spoken, they could move into the rhythm of the day. Now that the morning haze had lifted, and the quiet rituals of stretching and sensing had given way to a kind of soft readiness, the people began their daily work. But this work was not hectic. There was no clamor, no shouting, no long lists to check off, no offices, no deadlines, only tasks gentle, vital, and shared to survive in a world without machines. Early humans leaned on the most powerful tools they had, their hands, their minds, and each other. And so they began. The air, still cool, the sun just beginning to warm the surfaces of stone and bark. You can imagine the scene, a small group of people sitting in a loose circle, legs folded beneath them, the ground smoothed beneath their movements over time. One might be holding a stone flat, one striking it rhythmically against another, not with fury, but with focused intention, a quiet tap, tap, the art of making tools from stone. And it truly was an art. Not every rock would do. They had learned, through years and generations, how to recognize the right kind, flint, obsidian, or chert stones that fractured cleanly. that offered edges sharp enough to cut through hide or scrape bark. With each tap, flakes of stone fell away. The tool took shape, perhaps a knife, perhaps a scraper, sometimes a spear tip, but it was not done quickly, nor with frustration. This slow, careful process required patience, observation, and an understanding of how materials behaved. And as the stone slowly transformed, others joined the rhythm. A few feet away, someone gathered fibers, long grasses, flexible reeds, even strips of animal sinew, and twisted them between their fingers, weaving, binding, wrapping, making cord, nets, bindings for tools. The smell of drying hide might drift through the earthy, smoky. One person stretched an animal skin between two sticks, scraping it clean with a stone blade, working in long, steady strokes. The task had been done thousands of times before, and would be done thousands of times again. These were not chores assigned by command. There were no lists, no instructions barked out. Instead, each person took on what they had learned, what they were best at, what was needed. Children watched with quiet curiosity, sometimes helping in small ways, gathering pebbles, fetching a stick, copying motions with miniature tools. Older members of the group moved a bit more slowly, their hands lined with age, but their knowledge vast. They spoke softly, showing younger ones how to avoid mistakes, not with long explanations, but with gestures, a touch on the wrist, a nod, a correction in posture. Even laughter drifted through these hours. The tasks were important, but they were not solemn. You can almost hear a quiet chuckle as someone struggles to strip bark from a branch, and another calls out a teasing word in response. These people lived close together. There was no room for anger to fester, for grudges to linger. They needed each other, and so they shared the work. Further out, a small pair ventured toward a nearby stream, baskets in hand. These baskets, woven from grasses or bark strips, were shaped by skill and patience. They carried them not only for food, but for anything else the group might need: stones, shells, flowers, firewood. They moved slowly, eyes low, fingers brushing leaves and soil. To gather food was to know the land deeply, to know which berries grew on which bushes, which roots could be eaten raw and which needed to be boiled or roasted, which mushrooms were safe and which were dangerous. And so the baskets filled, not with haste, but with thought. A handful of red berries, a few wild onions, maybe a bird egg, discovered carefully and handled with quiet reverence. Back at the camp, others were building fires, not blazing, roaring flames, but steady, crackling hearths, small enough to control, large enough to warm food and body. The firestones clicked together in practiced rhythm. A bundle of dry moss or shredded bark was cradled close, and after patient friction, a spark caught. Smoke curled upward. A tiny flame took hold, and around it they gathered. This wasn't simply a functional act, it was community. The smell of roasted tubers began to fill the air. A stick rested over the coals, something skewered and turning slowly. There was no rush to finish, no need to gobble food and move on. Work blended into rest, into conversation, into more work. If a tool broke, it was mended. If something spilled, it was shrugged off. If the clouds gathered above, someone would look upward and suggest quietly, with a tilt of the head, that they move under cover. The work of surviving was not frantic. It was slow, rhythmic, rooted in cooperation and centuries of knowledge passed from hand to hand. They didn't have much, not in the way we think of possessions, but what they had, they made. And what they made, they used with care. Even a sharpened stick was more than a stick, it was an extension of the hand. A memory of a morning spent whittling, a reminder that their world, wild and open, could be shaped gently, and so the hours moved forward, quiet, purposeful, marked not by clocks or alarms, but by the position of the sun and the fullness of the baskets. Soon they would rest again, but first the land still had more to offer. Asterisk, asterisk, as the sun passed its highest point and began its descent, shadows lengthened across the clearing. The warmth deepened, insects hummed gently, and birds called out in bursts. From treetops, it was the perfect time to move, again, not out of urgency, but out of rhythm. The rhythm of survival and of curiosity. Foraging wasn't just a task, it was a quiet form of exploration, a way of knowing the land, not as a master, but as a respectful guest. Into the woods, there was no declaration, no need for discussion. The others knew where they were going. The group moved like a slow breath, inhale, exhale, people leaving and returning, always gently. Their feet found the paths animals used. Bare soles touched earth with care. To step too loudly meant scaring away birds, crushing mushrooms, or missing the subtle signs of what lay beneath leaves. And so they walked, not far, never in haste. A berry bush welcomed them with dappled shade. The berries, small and red, weren't just food, they were familiar. Their taste, a memory passed down from generations before. They picked slowly, not all at once, never everything. Some berries were left behind for the birds for the next day, for the bush itself to thrive. Early humans knew this without needing rules. The forest was not a store to be emptied. It was a giver of gifts if treated gently. As they walked on, eyes scanned bark and leaves. One stopped, crouched. A tiny plant grew low to the ground, its petals like stars, its roots hidden. It was a medicine. They knew, chewed for toothache, boiled for fever. They took a few leaves, just a few, then rose and moved on. Some days they found more. Wild carrots, their scent sweet and earthy. A patch of mushrooms growing in the moist shadows. But other days they found almost nothing. And that was all right. Foraging wasn't only about gathering, it was about remembering which plants had bloomed, which ones hadn't, where the squirrels had buried nuts, where the bees hovered, where footprints in the mud told of deer passing in the early morning. These observations wove into knowledge, a map not on paper, but in the mind, etched into memory through repetition, year after year. As they moved, the forest wasn't silent, but its sounds were soft. A distant creek murmured over smooth stones. Leaves rustled high above, now and then a crack of a twig beneath a step, and a pause to listen. Sometimes they'd stop and simply sit beneath a tree, by a boulder warmed by sun. No words were needed. They weren't searching for more. They were simply being part of the world. Around them, not apart from it, the wind passed gently through their hair. A dragonfly hovered, and for a while, time didn't matter. When they returned to camp, their baskets might be half full, or not at all. But they always returned with something. A new path remembered, a flower blooming early, the hum of the world. Still resting in their chest, they would share their finds, divided equally, without fuss. children would gather to look. Elders might smile and say, "Ah, this one again," as if greeting an old friend in the form of a tuber or herb. And slowly, the day began to drift toward rest. Bellies weren't always full, but they were rarely empty, because even the act of seeking, the walking, the listening, the noticing had its own kind of nourishment. The earth did not always give, but it always offered. And they, in turn, did not always take, but they always thanked. No ceremony, no speech, just care, just presence. This was foraging, not a hunt for food, but a practice in patience, in humility, in remembering that survival was not about taking control. It was about becoming part of something larger than yourself. And so the light dimmed a little more, and in the hush between day and night, the forest whispered its stories to those willing to walk quietly enough to hear them. By the time the foragers returned, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the western edge of the sky. Its light was softer now, slanting gently across the clearing. The air, still warm, had lost its harshness, and so the people rested. They did not speak of taking a break. They did not count hours or schedule pauses. Rest simply came when it was time. As natural as the sun climbing, then lowering dot, they sought the shade. A broad tree with a canopy like an open hand, the curve of a rock that held the day's warmth but offered cool shadows behind it. Even a worn patch of grass, pressed flat by many bodies before, invited them to lie down, and they did. Some laid on their backs, arms folded behind heads, gazing upward as clouds drifted slowly, dreamily overhead. Others curled on their sides, legs pulled up, eyes closed, breath steady. Children nestled close to mothers or to each other, heads resting against skin or earth or woven mats. Silence hovered, not heavy, not awkward, but like a soft cloth draped over the afternoon. It was not absolute. The wind whispered through leaves above. A distant bird offered a call now and then. The crackle of the fire, still glowing faintly, shifted with the breeze, and someone might murmur, barely louder than a breath, "Look, that cloud looks like a mammoth." But even speech was quiet now. There was no rush to return to motion, no inner restlessness pushing them to do something. Stillness was not wasted time, it was sacred. Food, if there was more, might be shared, now small handfuls of nuts, dried fruits, the odd root roasted near the fire. Children chewed lazily, their hands sticky from sap or berries, wiping them absent-mindedly on their legs. Some would nap, deeply but never quite disconnected. The sounds of the group were like a lullaby, reassuring, rhythmic, safe. Others didn't sleep, but simply closed their eyes and listened, to wind, to birds, to the soft shuffling of someone adjusting their seat on the dirt. There were no walls here, no roofs, just the open dome of sky. Yet they felt enclosed, protected, not because danger didn't exist, but because, for now, they were surrounded by the familiar, the smells of sweat and smoke, and grass, the warmth of the fire mingling with the coolness of shadow, the slow beating of a heart if you laid your head on someone's chest, the quiet breathing of people you had always known, always trusted. Even the animals knew this was a time for pause. A lizard sunned itself on a stone. A bird fluffed its feathers and settled in the crook of a tree branch. The world, for a moment, slowed in unison, and in that slowness, the mind wandered. not in frantic thought, but in drifting. What was that sound last night? Will the berries ripen again soon? Did the child's laughter echo more than usual today? Thoughts rose and faded like the breeze. No need to follow them, no need to resolve them, just feel them pass. And if someone stirred rising, to stoke the fire, to adjust a piece of clothing, to stretch their arms, the rest did not follow. There was no collective signal. Each returned to movement in their own time. Rest was not a shared schedule. It was a shared permission. The kind of rest that doesn't ask for justification, that doesn't need to be earned. It simply belongs, like the quiet, like the sky, like the warmth of sitting shoulder to shoulder without speaking. And so, time passed, not quickly, not slowly, just as it always had. The shade crept along the ground. The fire dimmed slightly. Someone yawned and rubbed their eyes, and with no announcement, the stillness began to shift again. A stir of motion, a gentle exhale. The next rhythm of the day preparing to begin, not because they had to, but because the sun was moving, and they moved with it. Asterisk, asterisk, in the quiet world of early humans. Childhood unfolded not in classrooms, nor with structured lessons, but in the slow and seamless rhythm of daily life. There were no bells ringing to signal learning, no slates or scribbled notes, no speeches, no lectures, and yet learning was constant, effortless, intimate. The children of the tribe were always watching. From the moment their eyes opened in the morning light, they scanned their world not with intention, but with instinct. Their teachers were not set apart. They were everywhere. Mothers gathering plants, fathers shaping stones, siblings laughing by the stream, poking mud with sticks. Every act was a lesson, but no one called it that. A child might sit in the lap of an elder, tracing a finger over the smooth line of a carved bone, not to be told what it was, but simply to feel, to sense the work that went into it, the weight, the purpose, and the elder might hum softly or remain silent. Sometimes just a glance or a quiet nod would pass between them, understanding without words. Small ones toddled after the older children, mimicking steps, mimicking gestures. If the older ones crouched to examine ants crawling over a rock, the younger ones did the same. If someone ran laughing into a puddle, splashing muddy water up their legs, the little ones followed, squealing with delight. It was not just play, it was practice. There were dangers, yes, a thorn, a bee, the sharp edge of a poorly gripped stone. But these, too, were lessons, taught not with fear, but with experience. A child who touched the glowing coal once rarely touched it again. A child who climbed too high and fell learned not through scolding, but through landing. And always someone was nearby, not hovering, but present. Even their games, if you could call them, that were laced with imitation. Children smeared their faces with mud, mimicking the paint of a hunter. They gathered leaves and arranged them into tiny nests, copying the way their mothers prepared sleeping spaces. They wrapped twigs in fiber, not to use, but just to understand. The tribe did not separate play from work, did not divide childhood from life. The child was already part of everything. When the group moved, children moved. When the group ate, they shared. When danger approached, even little feet knew to be still. And when someone laughed, the children's laughter followed. Not because they understood the joke, but because laughter, like fear, like calm, was contagious. passed not in explanation, but in presence. They heard the adults speak, but not in direct address. The words drifted over them like birdsong, rhythmic, predictable, and slowly, word by word, sound by sound, they learned the language. But more than words, they learned gestures, the meaning of a hand raised to the wind, the look exchanged between hunters before a chase, the subtle shift in tone when someone spoke of an animal they had not seen in a long while. These lessons were invisible but deep, etched into behavior, absorbed like warmth from a fire, not imposed, simply lived. And perhaps that's why the children were rarely still, always moving, always doing, but not in restlessness. In imitation, a child might spend an hour trying to carry a stick twice their size, just because they'd seen someone else do it. Or they'd sit with furrowed brow, poking a stone against another, puzzled why it didn't spark. No one corrected them. No one rushed them. There was time. There was always time. And when they succeeded, when they caught a grasshopper, or learned to twist a fiber into a thread, there was no applause, just a glance, a quiet approval, a nod from someone who had once done the same thing. This was how knowledge passed, not through shouting, not through tests, but through sharing space, through patience, through watching. And when night came, the children curled into arms, or onto woven mats, or nestled against a sibling's back. They slept with dreams not of tomorrow's lessons, but of what they had seen, what they had felt, what they would try again when the sun returned. In this world, to raise a child was not to shape them, but to let them rise, like smoke from the fire, slow, winding, and entirely their own. Step with care now, not into a room, but into a shadowed world, cool and still as the inside of the earth itself. The cave holds its breath. You can almost feel it, a hush that wraps around the stone walls, soft and ancient, like the memory of a whisper. Here, deep beneath layers of soil and time, we find the quiet voices of early humans, not spoken, not sung, but painted, and not in a rush. These were no casual markings. These shapes, these handprints, these animal forms, they were made with care, with intention, with the slow rhythm of someone who knew they were leaving something behind. The flicker of firelight would have danced on the walls as pigment met stone, shadows bending and stretching, mirroring the bodies of horses, bison. Dear Dot, it's easy to imagine a figure crouched low, a brush of moss dipped in ochre, tracing the curve of a horn, or fingers dipped in ash, pressed firmly against the wall. A handprint, sharp and unmistakable, a mark of I was here, of remember me, of we exist. But what did it mean to them? These weren't decorations. There was no one to impress, no visitors expected, no competition among tribes. They painted for something else. Maybe it was memory, a way to hold onto the moment when the hunt was good, when the animal was close, when survival felt certain. Or maybe it was prayer, not in words, but in lines and curves, a quiet plea to the spirits of the land, to the animals they chased, to the rhythm of the seasons. And maybe it was simply stillness, a moment apart from the tasks of the day, when hands moved not to gather or shape or fight, but to express it. See the world, not just survive in it. The pigments came from the earth itself, crushed stones, charcoal, minerals mixed with fat or water or blood. Each color had its own feel: red like clay, black like shadow, yellow like sun-soaked stone. Were no written instructions, no guides or tutorials, but still, the artists knew how to blend, how to choose the right wall, not too smooth, not too rough, a surface that spoke back. Sometimes they carved into the rock, etching lines that caught the light just right. Sometimes they blew pigment over a hand held to the wall, leaving a ghostly outline, the space where flesh once touched stone. And these hands, they remain. Thousands of years later, we can still see them, still feel the press of fingers, still sense the person who stood there, alone in the flickering dark, making a mark that time could not erase. There are animals that gallop across the walls of Lascaux in France, still as fresh as if they were painted yesterday. Bulls with wide horns, horses in mid-stride, birds with delicate wings outstretched, but always the silence. No written explanations, no signatures, just the images, the mystery. Some caves are hidden so deep within the rock that entering them today still requires crawling, squeezing, descending into darkness. And yet, our ancestors went there again and again, with only fire for light and the need to create. Perhaps they came in small groups, one painting, one watching, one holding the flame, perhaps seeking something only the rock could give. And when they left, they carried that silence back with them, back into the wind, the grass, the firelight, back into the slow rhythm of their lives. And still today, as you lie here listening, the marks remain beneath soil, beneath stone, waiting for us to notice, not screaming, not boasting, just resting there in the cool breath of the earth, in the stillness of the dark, in the eternal language of line and color. A reminder that even then, before buildings, before cities, before names, we made art, we told stories, we tried to understand what it meant to be human, quietly, delicately, like the touch of a hand against a cave wall. Asterisk, asterisk, the sky dims gently. The pale warmth of the sun has long begun its slow retreat, and the colors of the world soften grays, muted browns, deep shadows, and now, in the glow of the fire, a different kind of work begins, quieter, more focused, not rushed, not desperate, just hands moving, dot around the circle of firelight. Their silhouettes lean forward, knees drawn in, backs slightly curved. You can hear the gentle hiss of burning wood and the soft crinkle of dried grasses being sorted, a rustle of hide, the clink of bone against stone. This is not the time for hunting, not the time for running. This is the time for shaping, for tending to the tools and comforts that carry them through the days. There is rhythm in the work, weaving strands of tall grass into tight, flexible cords, first twisting, then folding, then looping under and over again. A slow, repetitive dance of the fingers, one that does not require thinking, only feeling. Somewhere nearby, a flat stone is set out, with small bones being carved, awls, needles, perhaps ornaments. Each pass of the edge wears down the surface, bit by bit. No need to hurry. Time is not something they hoard. Time is simply what they move through. A woman hums a low, tuneless song as she pulls sinew taut, securing a flap of hide to a cloak. Her child sleeps beside her, curled like a cub in a nest of furs. The flicker of firelight dances across her fingers, which move not like a machine, but like a stream flowing around each stitch. Others sit with baskets between their legs, mending the frayed edges, adding fresh lengths of twine. making sure no gap grows too wide. Each item here has been shaped by someone's hand. No factory, no workshop, just slow patience and an understanding of how things come together. And this knowledge, it's not written, it's passed by watching, by doing, by repetition. Over there, an older man is wrapping strips of dampened bark around a bent branch, fashioning a new handle for a tool. The strips will shrink and tighten as they dry. He knows this. He doesn't need to explain it aloud. He simply works. Because this is what evenings are for. Not for entertainment, not for noise, for the quiet crafting of survival. From time to time, soft conversation drifts through the air. Not urgent, just murmurs. Someone recalling where they found a strong fiber. Someone else remembering a dream. Children watching, asking questions in low voices, imitating with scraps in their own laps. The fire gives off more than heat. It gives a sense of enclosure, a center, a boundary, a gentle heart that the night cannot cross. Outside, the darkness hums with the quiet of crickets, of wind moving through trees, of distant rustles they do not fear. Inside the ring of warmth, they stitch and bend and wrap. Hands remain busy, but not frantic. Each task has meaning, not in ceremony, but in usefulness. A woven pouch to carry berries, a new set of bindings for winter footwear, a strand of twine braided just because it might be needed soon. There is a comfort in usefulness, a deep ancestral comfort, the sense that your hands are doing what they were made to do, not for applause, not for money, but simply for life, for continuing. And when the eyes grow heavy and the flames begin to fall to coals, they let the work drift to a stop. They set down the spindle, the carving stone, the half-finished weaving. They pull close the cloaks they have made, lie down on the furs they have softened, lay their heads beside the baskets, the bags, the tools, and they sleep, not as those who are idle, but as those who have gently built the world around them, one fiber at a time, one quiet evening after another. The morning comes again, not with alarm clocks, not with busy footsteps or a burst of noise, but with the soft shifting of air, the gentle paling of the sky, and the quiet intuition that a new day has begun. For early humans, the weather was not a topic for idle chat or a forecast glimpsed on a screen. It was a constant presence, a whispering companion, a force to be watched, interpreted, respected. As they stirred from sleep, their eyes turned upward, not with worry, but with a calm attentiveness. The sky was their canvas, a daily painting of hints and signs. They did not need numbers or satellite images, only stillness and attention. Imagine yourself stepping beyond the mouth of your shelter, bare feet pressing into soft earth, still cool with dew. The wind brushes past your cheek, and you pause, not to brace against it, but to feel its story. Is it dry? Is it wet? Does it carry warmth from the south, or a sharp crispness from the high mountains? They watched how smoke rose from their fires. Did it drift straight upward? Did it twist and scatter sideways? Was the air thick, heavy with damp, or light and skimming? These were not guesses, they were memories, gathered over time, from watching the way clouds moved across the morning sky, and what followed, from seeing how birds flew low before rain, or how insects vanished into the grass before a chill. They read the sky as one might read a well-worn map. High, feathered clouds stretched thin across the blue might mean dry days ahead. a low curtain of gray creeping in from the horizon that called for shelter, for storing dry wood, for staying close. Even the light held information. They noticed how certain mornings held a yellowish tint, a strange brightness before a storm, or how, on cold nights, the stars glittered more sharply in the dark, each one seeming to echo the cold that would settle into their bones. You might think of them simply as watchers of the world, but they were more than that. They were listeners, interpreters, intuitively tuned to nature's quiet signals. There were no calendars, no written records, but seasons lived in their bodies, the rhythm of rains and dry spells, of long days and long nights, all wove into their habits, their migrations, their decisions. And when storms rolled across the land, lightning flashing on far hills, thunder murmuring like a drumbeat in the belly of the earth, they did not panic. They prepared, they remembered, they waited. Even children learned to watch, to sense when the wind would change, to know that a certain bird song meant good weather, while the silence of the woods might mean a storm. It wasn't magic. It wasn't superstition. It was a kind of listening that modern life rarely asks of us. At dusk, too, they would glance skyward, not just for beauty, though the sky offered that in abundance, but for signals. Would the night be clear and cold? Would the stars wheel over them in sharp relief? Or would clouds roll in to wrap the world in shadow? In places where winters were harsh, such quiet observations were life-saving. A day's notice might mean the difference between warmth and frostbite, between gathering in time or being caught unprepared. They didn't just watch the sky. They wondered about it. The moon, its slow cycles, the stars, how they shifted with the seasons, the sun, its return after the darkest days. Perhaps they didn't have names for the constellations we now memorize, but they noticed their patterns. They told stories. They created meaning. There is something deeply peaceful about looking to the sky, not for control, but for guidance, not to demand answers, but simply to understand. The early humans understood, in the quiet of the wind and the curve of the horizon, that the world spoke constantly, softly, wisely, endlessly, and they listened. Even today, if you find yourself in stillness, watching how the trees sway, how the clouds gather, how the temperature of the air shifts across your skin, you might feel that same connection, an ancient thread tugging gently, reminding you that you, too, are part of the weather, part of the watching, part of the rhythm. Asterisk, asterisk, and now the light fades, not with a switch, not abruptly, but gently, like a long breath, let out into the dusk. The last ember of sunlight dips beneath the trees, and the air cools slowly, steadily, as the earth prepares for sleep. The tasks of the day have quieted. There is no more gathering, no more sharpening, no more wandering through the woods with careful eyes. Only the soft hush of return, the drawing together. Imagine yourself seated near a low fire, its warmth rising gently against the skin of your arms. The scent of smoke is soft, not choking, more like the memory of wood turned to heat. Around you, others settle in. Older ones first, then younger. The very old, wrapped in furs. The very young, leaning sleepily against a parent's side. There is no rush, no stage, no expectation. Only the stars overhead, like 100 quiet candles, blinking softly in the dark, and the fire popping now and then, flickering in that way fire does when it feels watched. This is when the stories come. They don't begin with once upon a time. or with grand announcements. They begin like the wind, drifting in. Starts maybe the one with the scar above his brow, or the woman with the long gray braid. Her voice is calm, low, unhurried. "There was a bear once," she might say, or "the river told me something today." And just like that, the night becomes a world of memory and dream and quiet reflection. Stories were not entertainment. Not only, they were memory, instruction, connection. A tale of the time the ice came early might teach a child what to watch for. A story about a fox that outwitted the hunter might remind the group to be humble. Sometimes the stories were quiet retellings of the day's moments. A bird that flew too close, a child who found a new stone. And in those tellings, even small events were made sacred. They spoke of ancestors to those who had walked before them, whose bones now lay beneath the same hills they climbed. Their names weren't written, but they lived in the tongue, carried forward like songs without music. Others spoke of dreams, strange ones, repeating ones, the kind that made the fire feel a little warmer or the dark a little less empty. And some stories, well, they didn't explain much. They simply wandered, like the long paths they walked by day, meandering tales that looped and twisted, meant only to be listened to, not solved. Imagine the silence between the words. Imagine the way everyone leaned in, not with tension, but with a kind of still curiosity. The kind that doesn't interrupt, the kind that waits. Sometimes, a child might whisper a question. Why did the eagle cry? Did the moon hear them? The storyteller might answer, or might not, might only smile and toss another stick into the fire. Because not every story was for explanation. Some were just for being shared, and when the stories ended, they didn't announce it. There was no curtain to fall. The fire would grow low. The flames would shrink, and a hush would fall that wasn't quite silence, more like a deep exhale, the kind of quiet that carries meaning even without sound. Blankets were pulled close. Children tucked beside siblings or mothers. The night stretched its long arms over them, and they slept beneath the stars, beneath old trees, beneath the weightless memory of stories told long ago, and those that would come again tomorrow. The fire might crackle once more before going still, its glow softening to coals, and above them the stars continued their ancient drift, watching, just as they had for all of time. Closing, gentle reflection, and farewell, and so we leave them there, not in chaos, not in noise, but in peace. Their days, once imagined as wild and frantic, reveal themselves instead as slow and rhythmic, and full of quiet wisdom. From the first smoke of morning to the last ember of night, the lives of early humans were shaped not by constant fear, but by constant awareness of each other, of the land, of the rhythm of sky and season. Perhaps in their simplicity, there was a richness we've forgotten, a slower kind of knowing, a softer way of being. As you rest now, with the hum of your own world just outside your window, may the gentle cadence of their days be like a lullaby to your mind, a reminder that life once moved slowly, and that slowness can be beautiful. Close your eyes, if they haven't already drifted closed. Breathe in as they did, breathe out as they did, and let sleep find you as it once found them beneath the stars, with stories still warm in the air. Good night.